Commission hearing. Joining us today, we have Mr. Jim Smith, who's the chair of the Arts Commission, as well as Caroline Benson, who is the director, along with Mr. Ian Myers, who is the finance director. Who's going to go first?
I'm going to go.
All right, Ms. Benson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Caroline Benson, Executive Director at Metro Arts, and I'm going to thank our Chair, Schmidt, here from Metro Arts as well, and Ian Myers, our Finance Director. And also we have some staff in the back, and I know we have commissioners and our arts community watching, I'm sure. I want to begin by thanking Mayor Cooper for his support in a budget that recognizes the importance of arts and culture in Nashville. I also want to thank this council for your continued support of the arts, from lessening proposed cuts last year to earmarking additional federal funding with CARES money to support our arts and culture nonprofits. We really appreciate that. I think the idea of the arts can seem abstract to many people. Maybe they think of the opera or the ballet, which are absolutely part of the arts, but so are murals and community dance recitals, visits from artists to your child's school, trips to the Nashville Children's Theater, performances at assisted living facilities, poetry slams, and neighborhood art projects. Art really is everywhere in our community, and it contributes to our cultural identity, our neighborhoods, education, and even public safety. And in Nashville, arts and culture is a big job creator and revenue generator. We know before the pandemic, the arts and culture sector contributed 4.5% to America's total GDP, which is more than construction or transportation or travel and tourism. Here in Nashville, arts and tourism, we know, are intertwined. When Americans for the Arts surveyed visitors to Nashville in 2015, 64% of those tourists said they were here to visit a specific arts or cultural event. This year's budget restores $200,000 to our budget that was cut from last year's grants budget, returning it to about $2.4 million. We are very grateful for that as we emerge from this challenging year. We know that those funds will go a long way to support our organizations that we fund. In a typical year, that $2 to $2.5 million budget provides operating support to around 50 nonprofits, who in turn employ about 5,000 Nashvillians, and those organizations, just the nonprofits alone, generate $429 million in economic impact countywide. So we think, and we believe, there's no better return on investment than the Metro Arts grants budget. We know it has not been a typical year, and for our arts and culture nonprofits, especially in performing arts, things will not be typical or back to normal for quite some time. We know these organizations are still hurting quite a bit. This is true nationwide and, industry-wide. In late 2020, 8.5% of the total U.S. workforce was unemployed, while 27% of musicians, 52% of actors, and 55% of dancers and choreographers were unemployed. So this is true in Nashville as well. We just surveyed our partner organizations, and about 30 who responded said, 51% have lost revenues, of course. 40% also report a decrease in fundraising capabilities and just the money that's coming in from, individuals and other foundations. 23% have fully resumed in-person programming, not a lot, and others have other concerns in addition, including increased operating costs, uncertainty around when artists and audiences will feel safe coming back. And as one grantee put it, singing is a super spreader event, so we certainly have to think about that. I'd also like to quickly talk about some of the silver linings from last year. We know our organizations are nothing if not creative and resilient. Many have taken this time to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility plans and practices. We know partners like Country Music Hall of Fame and the Symphony report they are creating even more educational content than ever before, and programming that supports physical, mental, and emotional health of our citizens. Virtual programming has led to a reach of wider, more diverse audiences. We're we're not through this year yet, and we know we have reports of 3 million virtual participants in programming, and we know that more than 200,000 of those are students. New partnerships have formed. The Nashville Opera has partnered with HBCUs around the country to create pathways for underrepresented artists into the opera. Oz Arts Nashville launched an initiative with MNPS called Oz STEAM Fusion that is providing over 20 educational creative arts activities and ongoing programming with math and science. At the Spring Fair a few weeks ago, Tennessee Craft hosted the Metro Public Health Department to offer vaccines to attendees. So we know, our organizations are using their creative talents to bringing change, education, and even health to our Nashvillians. In addition to grants that are, sort of more of an external focus, this budget, which increases funding around programming, helps us engage and reflect Nashville neighborhoods, develop artists professionally, foster racial equity programs, and support Nashville youth. We've been, reminded many times over this past year that the arts are really essential to our recovery and our growth and our identity. Through our Thrive program, we're able to pay artists to lead projects in neighborhoods with residents. We have had special virtual programs through that particular line of funding. Last spring, we supported more than 121 artists who reached more than 8,000 in-person and virtual participants. These funds that we are hoping to see, in addition to National Endowment for the Arts grants, make it possible for us to also relaunch REAL, which is our Racial Equity in Arts Leadership Program. And that is designed to help arts organization leaders learn about racial equity practices and also create change within their organizations and in the larger arts community. We can also continue our Diversity in Arts Leadership Intern Program, which matches Nashville arts organizations with college students who have traditionally not been represented in the arts. And then finally, this budget allows us to expand our restorative arts partnership with Juvenile Court and the Detention Center. We're able to introduce youth to visual arts, songwriting, music production, and other art forms, helping them to heal, grow, and thrive. This funding means that artists can reach more of those youth in detention, but also at the diversion stage. So we really thank you for your support of this budget, which helps us get back to the starting block and continue or expand programs that support the healing and equitable rebuilding of our community. I also wanted to mention we are starting a strategic and cultural planning process that will really look at citywide and agency strategies, and that process will start this summer. So we know that the arts are essential, and we really appreciate you for recognizing this and helping us to ensure that the arts are not a luxury and that they're available to all in this time of great challenge. So thank you. I think our chair, Jim Schmidt, wanted to say a couple words.
Madam Chair, members of the Metro Council, first I will echo what Caroline said and say thank you to the mayor and to all of you on behalf of the entire commission for the investments you make in our arts and cultural community. The restoration of past budget reductions and increases in this proposed budget are extremely important to the city, and we are very thankful for that. There are just a couple of things that I wanted to mention as considerations for the future. One, as Caroline mentioned just a minute ago, we're about to embark on a new strategic planning process for the arts here in Nashville. This will chart the course for our cultural and arts scene for the years to come. I expect out of that process we're going to learn something that we kind of already know, that Nashville has fallen behind our peer cities in public funding for the arts. Many of the cities that we compete against every day for the next corporate headquarters or other amenities, they're funding their cultural programs at 3 to 6 times what we do here in Nashville. I think the conversation should start about how we address that disparity, and part of that conversation might be some kind of dedicated funding mechanism into the future. Second, I'd like to reiterate that many of our artists and cultural organizations are still struggling, even as we move forward from the pandemic and reopen the city. We deeply appreciate this council investing heavily in the arts and the cultural community with the federal funding. As additional dollars are available, I'd ask you to consider consideration for these groups for your support. We're Music City, and we're the Athens of the South, and we need our artists, musicians, and creatives to stay here and thrive. And thank you very much for everything you do in your service.
All right, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Councilwoman Van Rees.
Thank you very much. Again, I will reiterate my sincere love and affection for everything that you are doing. And another thank you to my colleagues who worked on the COVID funding relief, and to my fellow council members for really changing some lives. And so I wanted to mention that again, and thank you for your leadership. Chair Schmidt mentioned a couple of things that I was going to ask about, which is what are we doing about finding designated funding resource in the future, and how can the council keep their eyes open for those opportunities? We're looking forward to the report that you give us to make those suggestions. Also, just making sure that I know that there's going to be funds that may not go through committee like it did last time, that's going to come through to make sure that if you see a resource that we need to make sure and spotlight, that you do that on behalf of the committee for us to be able to be proactive instead of reactive, and to kind of move forward in those regards. I appreciate your gratitude for getting you back to normal, which is kind of weird, right? But I know that there's been an eye-opening over the last 18 months or so, even with Mayor Cooper, and understanding the value of this, and we'll continue to have those discussions. And so I look forward to this committee's questions regarding funding, but as a chair of Parks, Libraries, and Arts, thank you again every day for what you're doing.
I'm scanning the room looking for hands. I keep losing.
But that was
Councilwoman Benedict.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the great work you do. I really just have some comments to say, you know, what you did through last year, and especially with the reduction in funding that you had to deal with. And again, especially at a time that our artists in this city needed more support than ever before, who were impacted. Everybody was impacted by COVID. Our artists who couldn't get out and perform found ways to do it creatively, but then they needed help getting that information out there. Many of them didn't have the technology available. The resources that they needed were only available through you, and you had very limited resources to take care of that. I just would like to give you a kudos. I hope that we can give you more. I always want to give you more. We are the Athens of the South. We are a city of artists, and we want to make sure that we encourage artists to come here, to write their music here, to paint their art here, to do their sculptures here, to perform live, or see, like that's why she's the chair of arts. You know, to have live performances for us. So if there's, please continue to keep us updated and let us know how we can help you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councilwoman Suara.
I thought I had to put on the show since we're talking about arts. For me, I don't have a question, maybe a little one. I'm looking at your racial equity programs and restorative arts program. Not a question much there. I see that you have some increased funding, 4.8 FTE. These are incredible programs, and the way that you describe it, it's very good. And I think when we're looking at diversity and equity inclusion, these are very important. So I wanted to thank you for that. I want to thank you for all that you do. But I wanted to ask you the question that we've been asking some of the other departments. For this important work that you're doing, we're talking about restorative arts, we're trying to help youths and do a lot in that area. Is this enough? Or do you think you need more?
It's a good question. I mean, I think we are hoping to max out the number of hours we can be in detention because it is limited. So there is sort of a cap on how much you can actually have contact with the youth there. And then we're building out the probation program as well, and that's just started in the past year. And then, of course, COVID and, limitations there. So we are running this program with a part-time person and then hoping to add some additional capacity there. So I think it'll get us to where we need to be, but certainly it's a program that could grow. And I know we're interested in that diversionary space versus, just sort of focusing on the folks who are already in detention. So I think there's always a bigger need for youth in the community. So we could certainly grow the program there, whether that be this year or in the coming years. Thanks.
Councilman Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And forgive me if this was maybe touched on before I stepped in the room, so shame on me. And this isn't necessarily related to this year's budget, but in the future, and maybe this is more philosophical long-term, where are we at figuring out, because Chairman Schmidt mentioned our peer cities that we are competing with for businesses and jobs, spending more than us. Where are we at figuring out what is that long-term solution of how do we come up with a really great dedicated funding source? And how do we get there? And maybe is that something that's maybe better addressed outside of this meeting, but I'm sure that's probably, I see lots of smiles, so it sounds like y'all have lots to say.
Well, I'll just speak briefly, and then I don't know if you want to speak to that. I mean, we are planning this, we're at the sort of end part of a procurement for a consultant team that's going to help us do sort of an internal agency, operational planning, strategic look, and then also has that expertise to look at benchmarking and what are other cities doing and what are those mechanisms. I mean, we've been having this conversation for years, but we haven't, I don't think the timing was quite right. So I think we have all the parts and pieces in place to at least get that research done and figure out what's best next steps.
And I appreciate that because I'm very guilty as anyone else when we are in budget years like last year when we are looking at what can we cut to try and fill other things, and I am the guiltiest of everyone, and I know that Chairman Schmidt and some of my colleagues know this. And it's not necessarily fair sometimes to be prioritizing different departments over others when you're looking at the full scope of what Metro's doing for the county. It is common for arts to be one of those kind of, seen as an ancillary benefit that is getting the first one to go get cuts. And so I guess figuring out a more dedicated funding source that isn't so reliant on an annual allocation from Metro, it's probably should be a priority. I mean, it makes y'all feel a lot safer and more, I don't know, it keeps people like me from making it so easy to try and pick on the arts. Essentially, that's probably the simplest way to say it, and I apologize.
All right, we are at time. I am scanning the room, looking for any last-minute questions. Seeing none, thank you so much, Mr. Schmidt, Ms. Vincent, and Mr. Myers for your time.
Thank you.